Hi guys, James here. Today I'm going to be talking to you about this, No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. This follows the story of a guy called Llewellyn Moss who goes around in the deserts of Texas and finds a big old bag of money at the scene of a drug deal gone horribly wrong. He takes the money, which is a huge mistake for him. He is then pursued by a hitman of mysterious origins called Anton Chigurh, as well as a downtrodden and not really into all of this brutal crime stuff, Sheriff Bell. And that is where the story really begins, and it's just sort of about the cat and mouse game between all three guys, specifically Chigurh and Moss, with Sheriff Tom Bell being the sort of emotional focus as he sort of bears witness to these events and is rightly horrified by all of them. So let's talk about a little bit of the history with this one. So this is my first ever Cormac McCarthy book, as last week we did my first Murakami book, and now we're doing the first Cormac McCarthy book. And as with Murakami, I was very impressed with what I found, and I'm looking forward to reading more by this guy. I'd obviously heard of the film adaptation for this book a lot longer than I really knew about the book or anything. I really had no idea what the story was about. I knew about Anton Chigurh because Javier Bardem's performance, I think, by now is somewhat legendary in just how creepy and evil it is, and that is very much reflective of the book. I read this entire book in one day, which sort of bears out with the Sunday Times quote here that it is utterly compelling. I couldn't agree more. It was really hard to put the book down, and like the day after I read the book, I watched the film, and the film is probably one of the more faithful book-to-film adaptations I've seen, and it just captures everything so perfectly. So let's talk about what is even good about it. So the real takeaway from No Country for Old Men is it's a very quiet story. It is probably the pinnacle of what is a character-driven story, right? There's a lot of talk on BookTube about, you always see this in tags, right? It's like, what do you prefer more, character-driven stories or plot-driven stories? And I always kind of struggled with the difference, because, I mean, surely any good story is a character-driven story, but with this book, I think I finally cracked it about why what a real character-driven story is. The plot of this book would not happen were it not for the three main characters, and it's very narrow in scope. This story, it really does sort of follow these three guys with very few exceptions. Like, there are very, very limited number of side characters, but the story kicks off because Llewellyn Moss makes a terrible, terrible decision, and were it not for that decision, we would not have the story. Like, things would just go on. The plot doesn't, basically, the story doesn't come to the character's doorstep. They go out and find it in this book. And the characterization of the people in the book, obviously, is going to be so important as a result of that. So let's talk about the characters. We've got Llewellyn Moss, who is basically, he's kind of stupid. Like, he's not a complete idiot. Like, he's a smart guy, but he makes like the worst possible decision. He stumbles upon this horrible crime scene, immediately deduces, oh man, like, probably someone has all the money, let's go get it. But like, at that point, we don't really know a lot about him or what his motives for doing that would be. So he takes the money, and then it all really goes downhill from there for him. He could just give it up, to be honest. Like, at almost any time, he could give this money up. But we do kind of get the feeling that even if he did, it wouldn't end well for him, because Anton Chigurh, let's talk about him, is probably one of the most pure representations of like this evil character that I've come across in a modern day contemporary novel. This guy is like, he's kind of like an unhinged psychopath, but just the way that Cormac McCarthy writes the narrative really informs the character. There's, I don't know, it's difficult to explain it, but like it's like he has mastered the art of show don't tell, right? A lot of the time you will hear about characters and you're like, oh, this guy is like, there'll be a bit where a character's like, this guy was a stone cold professional or whatever. But in this book, you don't get fed anything like that. You have to sort of infer things about these guys from the actions that they take. Anton Chigurh, for example, there's like a scene where there's a shootout. Obviously, he is a hitman, so he does the shooting, but on his way out, he picks the shotgun shells up from his shotgun and he pockets them, and like it's just like that tiny little thing tells you as the reader, like, okay, this guy is serious, like he's done this before, he knows what he's doing. There's a great video by Lessons from the Screenplay about this concept as shown by the film screenplay. Cormac McCarthy originally wrote this book as a screenplay, which is probably why it translates so well to film. But just, I mean, I think everything about the writing that Cormac McCarthy's done here is just so wonderfully immersive. It put me off at first, but he deliberately took out like all the, like, you can see on like this page, most of this is like dialogue, but he's taken out a lot of the sort of punctuation that is normally associated with novels. Like he's taken out like speech marks and things like that, so the narrative all flows together. It's still clear because he puts dialogue tags and things in, and it's still clear when it's dialogue and things like that, but he's taken out a lot of the unnecessary punctuation to make the text itself as clean as possible. And it put me off at first because I was like, where's all the speech marks? I don't understand. But I think the reason that he did it was to just keep you immersed in the story. You don't have to worry about all these little marks and how it changes things. You just read it through and really allow yourself to get sucked in. And after a while, it's like you're forgetting that you're reading a novel, which is exactly what you kind of want to be doing with a story like this. The descriptions of like this terrain and everything, they're not like he's not one of those guys who's really flowery in his descriptions of things. It is almost all focused on the characters and how they perceive things and they move through the environment. It's never really confusing or anything, but you don't spend all this time wistfully talking about the surroundings, because that's not what the story is about. And I just really like the writing style. It moves very fast. It's obviously thriller pacing. It kept me just hooked from start to finish. And thematically, like the way that the three characters interact, and especially the sheriff character is like the thematic focal point to the story. His character arc really exemplifies what the title means, basically, and the other two are just like a representation of society in a way. It's a very interesting book that it's hard to really explain in a review, but just trust me, if you've not read a Cormac McCarthy book before, this is probably a really good place for you to start. It's got great characters, the writing style is fantastic, and it just has this really it's got an immense sense of tension and atmosphere that it builds up throughout the text that kind of pays off when it comes to the ending. Like, it's not a book that's going to leave you with warm fuzzies, let me tell you that, but it is incredibly well written character study into these three guys, and their awful decisions. So there you go, that's it, my review for Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men. Join me later on this week when I'll be doing another review for Marina J. Lostetter's Numenon Infinity, and on Friday when I will be doing my top 5 science fiction novels slash short story collections. It's books, just books, short science fiction books. So that's it from me. Thanks a lot for watching. You've got more content down in the description below if you are interested, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.